Welcome to the Afikra podcast. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today on the series, we have Atef Said, who is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Illinois in Chicago. I came across Atef's work because of his book, Revolution Squared, Tahrir, Political Possibilities and Counter-Revolution in Egypt, and was super excited to speak to him after reading the book and reading his bio. So Atef, welcome to Afikra.
Thank you, Mikey. I'm glad and honored to be here.
So I will tell you why I'm excited to speak to you. A lot of academics weren't practitioners before becoming academics and haven't had the sort of on-the-ground experience. And one of the things that struck me when I first came across you, and we spoke about this on the phone when we were scheduling this interview, is that you worked as a human rights attorney in Egypt for a decade, from 95 to 2004, before entering into the ivory tower. So I'm curious, let's start there. What were you working on? Let's start with the most simple question, which is, what does it mean to be a human rights attorney in Egypt in the late 90s and early 2000s? What does that actually mean?
Thanks, Mikey. Good question. And I specifically, I was researcher, attorney, but most of my work was involving writing. So I wrote a lot about prisoners, freedom of press, pamphlets about students' rights, and so forth. It was really eye-opening in many senses about what I'm getting into, what type of regime is this, what are human rights conditions. So it was just excited that as a beginning my work in 1995 at something called the Center for Human Rights Legal Aid, and that was founded by Hisham Mubarak, who's a lawyer who is not related to Mubarak's family, and realized that all those people are in trouble, or are targeted under surveillance, and I didn't realize until later. Wow, this is very exciting. So it's a mixed bag of being excited to do right, and then there's lots of trouble. And repression is you have to learn what does the repression really mean, and you take time thinking about. And it's the adventures and the worry going together. For me personally, I realized later that, wow, this is part of what is lawyering, what is rule of law in Egypt, in what ways people are working in hard conditions, navigating funding, but at the same time, they could lose some of their credibility or their compromise their values or to some degree. And so these are lots of questions. I navigated more and more questions. I end up being frustrated, and I can tell you more about that. Personal stories about writing about torture, and I have friends of ideas or dreams of friends being tortured. And the personal triggers about why I decided to write 2 books about torture.
Yeah, so I want to talk about both of them. Torture in Egypt, a Judicial Reality, which came out in 2000, and Torture is a Crime Against Humanity, which came out in 2008. I'll ask them again a really basic question: who is torturing who in Egypt?
So,
and what does torture even mean?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an important basic question about what torture or abuse of maltreatment or, there is a convention against torture, United Nations, and there is some definitions of torture of civil rights, the UN Covenant of Political Rights, and so forth. But who is torturing who? I realized it was mostly state-sponsored or state torture to citizens, is activist or not. I realized that most of my cases I found were overwhelming cases of mostly political Islamists because of the 90s. The 90s was like the jihadist, some spike of terrorism or violent activity or extremism, violent extremism, and the state was targeting torture. Things became out of control, targeting activists, extremists, hunting, killing them, or torturing them, or the relatives' networks to gain confessions and information and so forth. But also I realized that actually not only Islamists, but also some leftists and socialists and people I know personally who were like anti-war activists in Egypt, anti-war in Iraq, and pro-democracy activists against Mubarak late, puzzling about why the state can do lots of things legally, like follow the rule of law, like where supposedly was a liberally founded or established judiciary, some roots in the colonial times. There's some legacy and a strong history of Egypt. Rule of law, judiciary, liberalism, and things along these lines. So it's really hard to read these confessions and cases and testimonies. Was kind of horrifying. So this first book was a report, was analyzing 18 years of cases of low civil compensations of torture by former, mostly Islamists, who earned compensations for the torture that happened in Egyptian jails, and so forth. The details.
Is it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Is it, again, a really simple question that I'm not sure the answer to. Is it technically illegal in Egypt?
It's technically illegal, but there's so many things legal. The boundary between legal and illegal is really fascinating in the semi-authoritarian, autocratic, a margin of democracy countries. So it is illegal. Confessions that's not torture should be annulled by judges. Ironically, things don't work this way, or depressingly, because some hand-picked judges, prosecutors, the regular officers who even do torture are worried or scared of intelligence officers or detectives or the public intelligence or the Amn al-Dawla, state security officers. So lots of hierarchies and messiness that make torture possible. But it's not only activists. Actually, the irony that later that part of the law processes that triggered uprising or the revolution in 2011 was torture. So that the irony or the reality is that not only activists, but ordinary citizens, poor people, marginalized peasants, forcing them to give up their lands they're renting, or redoing land reforms that happened under President Nasser, So there's lots of privatizations, public sectors, workers being fired, lots of things that targeting the social motivations beyond just the political goals of torture. So it was like a class thing in addition to the politically motivated torture for activists and so forth. One of the most horrific cases or situations or terms that Egyptian lawyers at the time came up or realized is that التعذيب بالمجاملة, how little mujamala, or like the complementary torture, or like influential persons, seek a compliment or a favor, or ask officers for a favor. I want to discipline this guy because I want him to sign a piece of paper or to give up the apartment or whatever. So it's really, it was too daring to violate the law and don't give, excuse my language, whatever is about the law.
Okay. You mentioned the revolution. And this is also an area of interest for you as a sociologist. In your lifetime, has there been a revolution in the Arab world? What does it mean to have a revolution, a Thawra? What does that actually mean? What is a useful working definition for the term revolution when you talk about the Arab world?
There are sets of great questions and not easy to answer right away. But I have to admit that I've been also a socialist, not a socialist activist, not only pro-democracy activist, a human rights researcher. So I was working with like usually socialists, labor organizing, and so forth. I always wrote and read about revolutions, and I never dreamt or imagined that I will witness a revolution in my lifetime. And there's like a deep down, I talk and call for or advocate for the idea, but on my heart, I had deep skepticism. And it's truly the case until I saw hundreds of thousands of people and taking over and so forth. One of the things to answer your questions, like I would say, like during the revolution, how does it feel to be in the revolution, or what does it mean to be in the revolution during the revolution, and then possibly after a defeat? And then what is a working definition of revolution? So let's start with the first one. It's something never, when we talk about, there's the famous quote Lenin about decades takes weeks and weeks takes decades and so forth. It's like people becoming hyper politicized. People who never imagined that they are really interested in things in politics, and they believe in the power or they practice power. They are around you, like people, ordinary citizens or siblings and neighbors, and people who are really apolitical. They are really machine gun بالحي بالمصري, like people who are walking on that, scared of their shadows, They are doing that, and it's like weird. What happened? There's so many things happen to make this case, and not just a symbolic, metaphorical, or like a cheesy term about breaking fear barrier. It takes time. Even breaking fear barrier requires battles, rallies, and blood, and sacrifices, and like determination, and like some transformative moments happen to so many. So this is like, it's an overwhelming things, emotions, ideas about power, bravery, determinations, and also uncertainties, believing in a better. It's really amazing, and it's hard to talk about this now. I understand, and that's why maybe we'll go to the idea of the defeat.
But let me, Atef, I actually want to dig a little deeper. At what point does a protest become a revolution? What has to happen for a protest to become a revolution?
Yeah, thanks. So there's academic scholarly answers to this, but also feeling on the ground. Academic scholarly answers, there's some certain conditions that should happen. A big regime crisis, economic, political, and so forth. So revolution is not just a mass protest, not just the people on the streets. Like, it has to be serious and critical enough to be able to challenge a regime, and the regime is becoming bold enough to not be able to repress. Like, things are getting out of control, and this means like newer ideas about sovereignty, governing, and so forth. So the scholarly answers is so many conditions, such as regime crisis, regime incapable to suppress or struggling to suppress. Mobilizations is that big, on a big scale, that's really critical, that it's difficult to contain. Formations of revolutionary coalitions, things along these lines. So there's some ideas about global, regional, context of like favoring or tolerating or not suppressing. Like, there's lots of conditioning here. So this is like the scholarly answer.
Yeah.
And the human
What's
answer.
the non-scholarly
answer?
answer?
The non-scholarly answer. Yeah, the non-scholarly people are really, there's something important, transformative in the political psychology of I would say the single person, not just a collective. When you see masses, and you see like you're really one block with masses. Of course, it happened when I interviewed people for activists and friends and colleagues and like comrades, and they told me many answers about the moment where their life transformed, and they said, I realized this is a revolution, not a mass protest. This is not a calling for toppling Minister of Interior or forcing them to resignation or ending emergency. It's something like bigger than they imagine. This collective determinations, collective bravery, believe in a better life. It's a psychological deep feeling that's hard to grasp, but also people are like, and I write about this in the book in some sense, about this notion that is in a folkloric Egyptian idea about a nadah, or the caller. The revolution is the caller, or the some siren, or some mystical, beautiful creature, a female, hunting or chasing or attracting peasant men on the countryside across the river Nile, or like they are being absorbed. And it doesn't mean that they are agentless. It's actually they are really truly believe that it's something bigger and worth fighting for, and it is okay that we are going to do that, and anything is better than what we have now. So it's not they are clueless or crazy or stupid. They really they have this dream that's it's a dangerous temptation. So this human thing,
there's no given this working definition, there's no outcome that needs to occur.
Yeah, this is a great
because
question.
like I'll tell you the context I'm asking this from. I'm asking this from Beirut right now, where I am, and people refer to what happened in 2019 as a Thawra.
Yes.
And most people, if you describe it as Thawra, a revolution, most people here, cynically, who still live here, cynically say, what Thawra? And no, nothing changed. This is a ridiculous, this is not a Thawra, right? So
true.
In your mind, there's no sort of outcome that needs to occur or
Yes.
needs to qualify a moment in time as a revolution. It simply is if we say it is.
Yes, this is a great point, and I have some answers, and I want to follow up on like previous question too. So it's this is what we describe, or like the academics, or like specifically those academics who love history, or the historic. I am trained as a historical sociologist, so sometimes we are judging only based on outcomes after they happen. So, and I don't call this like a teleological thinking about this is defeated, so we cannot talk about that. I'm talking about the feeling at the time, at the time, this collective political psychological transformation of people's minds and hearts and so forth. So I want to go back to how I define revolution, and that was a very challenging thing. Like one reviewer, when I was writing my book, asked it, how do you define revolution? Yeah. And I want to come back to the point of defeat in a bit, like in a second. But how I define revolution is it's really not just it's a big word. Of course, we're not talking specifically about social political revolutions. We're not talking about, industrial revolutions or all these like revolutionary ideas, or things like that, or the bureaucratic or disciplinary revolutions, or GM, as revolutions. Some in the US, you see all these billboards, car, Ford revolutions and so forth.
Yeah.
So it was a challenging task for me, and it was not easy to think about revolutions as a multifaceted phenomena. It has dreams, but it's also reality. Like a revolution, they have to make them happen. Like there's sacrifices and planning and organizations. Yes, there are defeats. There are no guaranteed success. Yeah. And so it's a reality. It's the idealist. It is a movement in the street, but it's also change. We can look at all these angles. It's also ideas about liberations, but also it could give birth to autocratic, outcome. So it's really complex phenomena. It's hard to, but in short, it entails people's power to make history. And I know this is a cliche term, but that's true. To go back to the point about outcome, people were not crazy in Lebanon or Sudan or Algeria, or they are naive or stupid, and that's in Egypt. And they were not blind about outcome, but they believed that anything is better than what we have now. So they have maybe a narrow vision. They were not ready enough to compare, or didn't think, or didn't realize how big is our counter revolutions and how difficult or complex are the odds. And this is something we need to talk about. But they were not overlooking outcome. They were not lazy. They were not stupid. They have this tunnel vision that it is all one way forward. It's a better future or miserable reality, and so forth. I want to go ahead, but I want to talk about this defeat. Why the looming around Gaza, like in few recent instances I was presenting on my book, I've been asked what are lessons learned, or close friends told me I'm not able to read something about the revolutions. I'm really things along these lines. So maybe I'm naively still have some optimism, or maybe I'm healed of trauma of defeat, or personally writing a book.
A combination.
Took a decade writing something emotional to me, and scholarly, academic, and friends, and people who were in solitary confinements, and so forth, and lots of so it took lots of energy, but maybe I went through this process of thinking and so forth. But for me, I realized that this idea about defeat is as much as it's mental and emotional. It's also, we should think about defeat in like political and intellectual ways. Like we need to think about defeat, what happened. We need to learn from mistakes and so forth. And it's the idea that there was no Arab revolution that will ever be successful. Something along these lines, when in our first conversation, you asked me this challenging question. And I know it's in France. All revolutions they have many unpredictable outcomes. And even the American Revolution was the anti-colonial settler plantation holder revolution that there's no women and slaves were a part of it. So there's many, and we need to talk about the odds that pro-Arab democracy actors and thinking about, and many other things, organizations, lessons, what are real potential coalitions, problems, and things along these lines. I can't go on and on, but I interrupted you.
No, I want to ask you about Tahrir Square. If I were speaking to you in 2012 and I said to you, what does Tahrir Square mean to you? Or 2010. What did Tahrir Square mean to you in those years leading up to the revolution? And what does it mean to you now?
You'll make me cry if I go on and on this question. I'll try to not to cry, but I would say two things. One is that there is the academic answer that I wrote a book about Tahrir and the revolution in some sense. There's a story about Tahrir before the revolution, during and after, up until becoming almost a militarized zone under the military now. But also the academic, the trajectory, but also the depth of the story of the camp, the famous revolutionary camp, the uprising, but also the emotional answer, the personal humanistic feeling of being there, or being like, I was in these lands, or like I was into first day, and worried, and had lots of ideas and hope and anxiety. Like I'm going from some sort of a promised land. I arrived in Egypt on February 4th, 2011. Seeing images in Al Jazeera and battles, and so I'm going to almost a promised land of liberation, or the most important liberated zone in Egypt at the time, or the center of action, and so forth. I can't talk on and on about this feeling personally. So I would stop, but I would hear about this personal. I can go on, but I want to briefly talk about the academic, or summarize the academic.
Please do, yeah.
So there's two things here. One is that it was really telling for me to trace a story, historical, about before the revolution. From 1972, the students protest against that for not doing action to liberate lands, with no transparency about war plans and so forth. 1977, bread uprising, people are in Tahrir, and 2003, anti-war in Iraq. So there's all those dreams about, and even in the colonial times, Qasr Nil Bridge or barracks, there was a British barracks, colonial barracks. So there was like, Tahrir historically was a target of protests, but there's also an unattainable land. Like symbolically, we need to relive the dream or reoccupy this land, or this piece of the center of action. And also, coincidentally or interestingly enough, is that this is the center of the downtown, ministries of interior, justice, parliament, headquarters, cabinet. So it's actually you are blocking down the government, So tracing down the history was important to me, about unattainable land, to liberated, to fighting over these lands, about competing factions, say who owns, who has the authority to speak on behalf of Tahrir. Later, 2011, 2012, with the polarizations, Islamists, seculars, and so forth, all these, to a militarized zone after the coup in 2013. So it's like lots of transformations happen, and I need to trace the story and changing the meanings and the political battles over Tahrir. But the other thing that was really important to me is to think of Tahrir during the uprising in its thickness, and its thickness as not just a target of protest or the site of action, but also a site of life, and like feed the hospitals, treating the wounds, hygiene and food and bathrooming and living together and utopia. So many things. So I had a beautiful passage in the book, and I cannot memorize it at the second, about how all these layers about life and death, center of action, center of mobilizations, center of deliberations, and so forth. So I try to give answers to the question. Maybe perhaps I try to avoid talking more about emotions and tears, about people are really, activists are scared to walk around Tahrir. It's like
but I mean, it's
target
not
is a hyper-policed, militarized space. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's not emotions for emotion's sake. I mean, I'm primarily interested in the cultural significance of this space, right? That has become iconic. And as things tend to become iconic, they tend to become larger than life, but also small and sort of without nuance and without contour. So I'm curious, what is this even, is this a place that only exists in our imagination now?
Yeah, that's I love that you reminded me of symbolism, of what Tahrir embodied at the time. And
give us the context, Atef, sorry to interrupt you again. Give us a context of what it embodied before. Because many people listening, me included, I don't know what Tahrir meant before I heard it constantly on the news. I don't know what it meant to Egyptians.
No, it's a downtown. There was a fountain. There was a pedestal that was supposedly would host a statue for Khedive Ismail, and then Abdel Nasser, and it was designed by Haussmann, French famous architect who designed Paris for counter-revolutionary purposes. There is lots of there is movies, Ismail Yassin and many others, Al-Atab al-Khadra, look it up, and many, like Tahrir appears in so many books. So there's lots of symbolic, cultural, and also political significance. And it's a center of action, it's a center of the government, it's a center of life, near downtown restaurants. There's lots of old cafes where Najib Mahfouz used to sit, Ali Baba Cafe, or like also Rish Cafe nearby. So there's lots of layers of history where intellectuals and anti-colonial writers, all the way to students' movements and so forth, bloggers used to meet. So there's lots of higher layers of symbolism, if you mind,
Yeah.
And liberating this meant something about popular power and the people's sovereignty. And it's not, this place is not owned by the state only. The state doesn't control the place. It belongs to us. There is a famous song and actually was named some feminists in 2005, an Egyptian feminist and women activist, and who, when Kifaya refused to protest after women were beaten and sexually assaulted in 2005, the movement was called Shara Lina, named after one song from the Sparrow, Al-Asfour, famous movie by Yusuf Shaheen and so forth. So this is a feeling about the Shara Lina for the first time. It's actually, we own the streets, we own the state. The state doesn't own us, we own the state. So there is lots of significance of the space that and actors at the time, or the revolutionaries, said for the first time, the square lives up to its name, and there's so many Azadi in Iran, and there's so many squares called the Midan al-Tahrir, Midan al-Shuhada, all countries for patriotic, nationalistic, Shufinic, whatever purposes. But when people claim the space, it's something different, Does it only live in our dream now? Yeah, I think it's became, and before actually talking to this, is the idea of iconism or symbolism that does violence too. I want to be honest too. I'm not trying to think of only Tahrir as a utopia. At the time, there was sacrifices and blood and pain and routine and hygiene. And there's many stories under this iconic image. And this is something that Western observers and writers or even Egyptian activists, many Egyptian activists would talk about the glamorous side of Tahrir only,
Yeah.
So there, these iconic, the spectacle, making Tahrir as a spectacle, hit so many things on the ground, details that's important about it. Together, tensions, gender division of labor, and so forth. Now it's said it became lost utopia, as you are saying. It became just in imagination. I want to read this now. But there's a larger story about the Egyptian revolution is not only Tahrir. It was not only, and that's something important I discuss in the book, and that's a big mistake that actors and fall for, in short.
Yeah. One of the places that the revolution was in digital spaces, right? So social media and digital spaces played a very prominent role in terms of mobilization, in terms of advocacy, education, organizing. And this is an area of your interest now, understanding how digital technologies are shaping society, shaping advocacy. I'm curious your thoughts on the digital sphere these days.
Yeah.
And how technologies are maybe speeding or slowing up our ability to advocate for ourselves.
Thanks, Mike. It's a great question. Maybe I am fortunate, and maybe not fortunate that was trained as an academic, as a historical sociologist. So I love to think about things over time. So before talking about this era of a digital despair or digital repression, you might, or algorithms, or crippling our imaginations too. They are something that give us convenience and comfort. But really, it's really if you're being fed ideas constantly based on your search history or whatever, it's like there is some tunneling, some, it's some tunneling for your imagination, creativity, initiation, and so forth, and even how you mobilize and so forth. And so to step back in 2011, 2010, 29, 28, from the green revolutions and like movement in Iran to Tahrir Square to Occupy Wall Street, was different landscape of social media. It's not only there is newer generations of platforms or softwares or from TikTok to how Twitter and Facebook are changing, and the community standard, but also the technology of hacking, surveillance, and tracing. At the time, people had the upper hand. In short, it was area where was really a reasonable margin of freedom of people on their spaces to some degree. Yes, it was owned and regulated by government and corporations, and ultimately, but they didn't have the upper hand, So it's in constant transformations, in short, and in a very crude image, I would say that we are at the moment of the utopia or digital utopia, and we should not think of a techno-deterministic ways. That's just social media or digital spaces were just places for freedom. It was a lot of issues on internet, police, and so forth. But crudely, a decade ago was a great moment of solidarity, utopia, activism, and mobilizations, digital activism, and so forth. To now is like spaces of misinformation, despair, anxiety, depression, and so forth. I'm not losing hope that these spaces, not the battle over these spaces, are not settled yet. Even though Russia, China, US, UK, most named Western powers are investing, not just Russia and China, as what many Americans analysts are saying, are investing heavily, and Arab countries, Arab regimes, heavily on digital repression. Yeah. And you can talk about what are the methods and tools forever. I'm just learning and teaching through these issues at the moment.
So I want you to explain to me how two terms I've heard you use, how neoliberal authoritarianism and digital repression are related. Can you explain that to me?
I mean, neoliberalism has become like a buzzword, and like just neoliberalism, maybe it's a market freedom, market fundamentalism, or whatever. There's lots of synonyms. But also when it comes to the state, simply means like the state is backing down or leaving it to the market, to do whatever corporations and so forth. Or the state is in the back seat. The front seat is capital, money, market, and so forth. So it's not only me, but actually many scholars and activists has been describing that we live in an era where democracy has eroded in the so-called Western established societies themselves. So in other words, the binary or blurred between, or the line between authoritarian and democratic is blurred. So what I describe as neoliberal authoritarianism is that really we are living in a global era of neoliberal authoritarianism where the market is ruling. State is, excuse my language, is like for capital. Of course, there's warmongers like in Lebanon, or like the different, or the corrupt elite, or the state is not are not themselves the businessmen. They are bedfellows, state and capital, and so neoliberal authoritarianism, something along this line, describe the fact that market rules, State is a pimp for capital, excuse my language, again. And China, US, Arab world are different. I know that the big margin of freedom in the US.
Yeah.
So I have even go further to say that, to argue that China is authoritarian neoliberal state versus US is a neoliberal authoritarian state. So something along these lines about that. The heavy focus on the coercive authoritarian feature versus the neoliberal logic that's driving. So in short, something along this line. This is neoliberal authoritarianism. The digital repression is becoming a phenomena in today's world. The digital spaces in so many countries, even Western, as we can see, Western established democracies were right-wing fascist, anti-immigrant, populist regimes, populist politicians are rising. They are aware that it's democracy, or they are intentionally limiting democracy, electoral politics. So that's why, and also targeting streets, but or not, as we can imagine, like there are protesters in everywhere, even so-called West, So they are real actors and movement organizers have no really space to use but digital spaces. In short, vis-a-vis electoral politics and streets, or the in combination. That's why digital repression has been rising. What is digital repression? Digital repression is like, there's no one formula, but it's a mix of tools, like technological tools, perhaps also penal tools. Like you start with a technology about hacking, phishing, doxing, and hiring tools, and so many things governments can do, and shutting down or controlling encrypted some platform, WhatsApp, or Viber, whatever, all these things about, but also combining this with other methods. It's not only purely technological, but also legal, about entrapment, about trolling, targeting Mikey, for example, or Atef, and then entrapping them to a location, or stopping people on checkpoints or police stations and asking them, like what Israeli does with Palestinians. It's a global thing now. And the US and Trump, let's check people's cell phones and see what they are saying and so forth. So that actually technology is a starting point, or they're arresting you and they look at your profiles online. So digital repression is the umbrella to many forms of repression of actors, to silencing, targeting them online.
Atef, I want to ask you a question about something I read on your profile. Okay, and it's about one of the new projects that you're working on, which explores the future of revolutions. And I'm going to read a sentence that is on there, presumably that you wrote, and I want you to try to explain it to me because I couldn't quite understand and wrap my head around it. Okay.
Go ahead.
It says the project is theoretical and historical in nature, where I examine the shifting meanings of revolutions historically in relation to coloniality and decoloniality and knowledge production. Explain to me what that means. So when you think about coloniality and decoloniality and knowledge production, how does that shift the meaning of what it means to have a revolution?
Thanks, Mark. So that you asked me one of good questions. Some of the maybe the thread that blends so many things about this project together.
Yeah.
So it's a really critical thread. So thanks for asking that. So before answering straightforwardly this, I would just say, unpack it for a second. It's what we know about revolutions are from either experience or books, right? From experience and books. And really we are confined, to some degree we are confined by what we're told. These are the revolutions. These are the classics. The classics are unrepeatable. Democracies are immune from revolutions. Like some certain vocabulary or terminology or given ideas and we believe them, and we don't question them, you know. And when I tried to, as an Arab, Middle Eastern, African, you might, Egyptian, you call it whatever, or transnational citizen. And I was like buzzed or like somehow uncomfortable with the idea that why classical are classical. Is, you know, why, like there's some certain ideas about establishment of or paradigms that were given to us, and we have to copy these paradigms. And the revolution don't work this way, because they always bring new, and every revolution is foundational to a certain degree. And we cannot say that some revolutions are foundational than others, unless we are really talking about modernist thinking, or like these are the Western established revolutions that taught you how you think about revolutions. And other revolutions are less important because they are anti-colonial or anti-slavery or Arab world, developing world, whatever, third world revolutions. So something interesting. So, and to give a concrete example before I answer this question is also when thinking about the Egyptian revolution or the Arab Spring and how and why it went wrong. Well, what went wrong to certain degrees was partially because the post-colonial state, people believe that states are important, no matter how it is corrupt, no matter how it is failing us, no matter, it's only those corrupt guys, but we need to save the state. They worship the state, but the state is really was rotting to its bone, you know? So there's something about how we think of this colonial state, or the post-colonial state, as a divine. These are the state, or this is the military that stood against the occupation, or the anti-colonial, had deployed anti-colonial rhetoric and so forth. So in other words, I need to really think about what we learned about revolutions, in short. So when I wrote this sentence, I'm thinking that really, while it makes sense to study past revolutions and to know that every revolution is unique, there's some hierarchy that's being made, or some certain revolution privileged in history and so forth. We know we need to study why is that and how, and also think about that this is a critical step to think about the future. That's the least we can do. And to re-question and to revisit what we know about revolutions while we are examining things that happened in the past, and at the same time thinking about the newer conditions that's emerging today, like technology, neoliberalism, or democracy. Like it's the idea, like we wanted a democracy like what's happening in the West.
Yeah.
This is like in the Arab world, for example, 2011, or like some say we need a better democracy than what happened in the West. We need really a socialist democracy, you know, or we need, so there is some confusion about what do we mean by democracy. The West is democracy is being eroded systemically in the so-called West, becoming.
So who's doing it right? I mean, I understand, I get your point, right? You're saying, come on, we need better than that, right? We need better than this thing. It's almost like we're saying, like, we need better than electric vehicles. We need better than Tesla, right? Tesla is going to leave us with all these batteries all over the place. Like, we need something better. We need better than the iPhone 15. We need better than that, right?
Yes.
What do we? Who's doing it better? No, Hilm.
It is Hilm, but we can. We have to believe. This is part. It's not. I am not. Neither me nor Mikey would be able to decide or have the authority. It's actually human belief, and this is something. It's important to believe that humans have faith and belief in and determination. Many humans, not all humans, but many humans live in liberation and emancipation and a better life. They will continue to do so because misery, sacrifices, poverty, torture, repression, you know, and it's not automatic. It's not mechanical. It's not just for the very fact of believing in better life or conviction that we call for revolution will happen. There is no guarantee, but it's always there. So nobody will do it better.
Yeah.
The only next time we have to do it better. And I want to tell you that sometimes every act in newer revolutions, they learn from previous actors, whether or not, even in their own context. Regimes too learn. So this is something important because nobody's doing it better. It's an accurate statement to say. But also, both regimes and protesters will continue to learn because one wants to learn how to repress, and one will learn about, I need to learn from the previous mistakes.
Yeah.
The question is how to get out of defeatist mindset.
Can I ask you?
Times of defeat.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question since you're a sociologist. I'm very curious about this. Again, very simple question that has a very complicated answer. When do you think was the best time to live in Egypt?
This is
for society at large.
No, this is a great. I mean, I even as a historical sociologist, as a human who was like, I'm now 53.
Yeah.
I was born in 1970, and in July, a few months before. Sometimes I feel like I'm blessed. I'm glad, even though I have a love-hate relation with Abdel Nasser, but like Nasser is better, relatively speaking, is better than any of those bloody dictators. He was a dictator, but was a just dictator, with an anti-colonial dictator. There's like lots of issues. Sometimes I feel like I all tell myself, I was lucky that I was born under Nasser, not Sadat. I would hate myself, I didn't have a straightforward answer to you because it's all relative, I just based on books or nostalgia or liberalism or politically or socially, but sometimes I love the 70s as a kid, I love the 70s, and it's also the 90s was, relatively speaking, also teleologically now, thinking after the fact, compared to Egypt under the current regime, there's some margin of freedom. Mubarak was a dictator. There was some margin of freedom, margin of organizing, margin of some degree of some conviction. Electoral politics are not lost. I mean, once the election was forked in 2010, that was like one of the triggers for the uprising. But there was always electoral politics are not that corrupt, or not controlled by intelligence apparatuses and money and security. So it's a beautiful question. There is no easy answer to it because you judge it based on movies. Also, as a sociologist, I love movies, and I love the Najib Mahfouz novels and watching them in cinema. And sometimes I feel like I love this side and I hate this side, and like all this. But I when I see women, 1919 uprisings or revolution against the occupation, British occupation, I wish I was in that time. We need time back machine to have a better answer. Maybe this is a sociologist or a fiction writer answer, is that we need a time machine and go back and forth and then make up our mind on time to have really one satisfactory answer. And it would be all individual. It would not be answer that appease everybody. It's just for you personally, for me.
Yeah. What do you think Nasser's approval rating is in Egypt right now?
It's hard to tell, but I would expect Nasser is loved. The middle class Egyptians, they will learn because of really public education, and the state really heavily expanded and on public education, land reforms, and so forth. Upper class Egyptians since Sadat and beyond and after, they don't like Nasser. This is a socialist guy. I know it's a top-down socialism, and so forth. Of course, the socialist, or the state socialist, or the state capitalist, if you might, there's also corruption. So it was not really heaven-like. But I would say that approval rating are high. People are impoverished.
Yeah.
Economy in Egypt is deteriorating at the moment because of so many things and so forth.
Atef, thanks so much for joining. I really, really do appreciate it tremendously. I know I asked you a lot of simple but very tough questions, so I appreciate you trying to answer them.
Thanks, Mikey. I really enjoyed it, and I learned as well from the conversations. And I'll keep thinking about these questions.
Thank you.
Glad to join you. Thanks.